Hey everybody, so this week we're gonna be getting into working with ink, washes, and some brushes as well. And today we're gonna be looking at different types of brushes, different types of pens. As you know, in the drawing materials list, there's a couple different options available, and you can decide which one you want to use, which one you have available to you. It's up to you. So you can use a marker or you can use a dip pen or whatever you want with these different assignments. We're also going to be talking about the elements of design, and these elements are basically the skeleton, the core fundamentals that make up art. And they're basically things like color, line, value, space, shape, texture, form, these sorts of things. And they're just a way of looking at the world. So as you draw more and more, I think it's important to also draw even when the pencil's not in your hand. So when you're out looking at the world and looking at a tree or doing whatever you're doing, look at how the light falls on that tree and figure out this is the light side, this is the dark side. So you're always observing, and by observing in that way, you can also be practicing drawing just by looking and seeing how those shadows fall. So that's important to think about as you go forward with the class. There's 3 different assignments that you have this week. One of them is an upside down Picasso drawing, and I'll have a time lapse of that in the video that you can watch for reference on how to do that. And the image is up on Canvas, so you can check that out as well. The second one is a blind contour portrait of yourself. So you're going to take a picture of yourself with your camera, and you're going to turn your picture upside down and then draw yourself upside down as well. And then the third one is a finished portrait done upside down in the same way, but this time you can look at your paper while you're drawing. You'll get more information on these as you go through the video. So I hope you've all had a good week, and we keep on drawing and we keep on making progress. First, let's look at some different brushes that we can use when we're working with ink. And I've got a lot of different brushes here. As you'll notice, a lot of these brushes have a number on them. This one has a number 10 right there. And that just indicates the size of like the head of the brush here. Here's an 8. And you can see this one's flat. This one's more moppy. Here's another flat one that's a little bit shorter. And I've used these up. They're a little bit gummed up. Here's a larger mop, it's called, if you want to do a big wash of some sort. So, and then here is a liner, and this is in your list actually. So this is the AIT Art Mini Liner, and here you can see 3 times 0, and 0 is the smallest brush, and after you get to 0, you can get like 8 zeros or 10 zeros, you know. So you can have as many zeros, just means smaller and smaller and smaller. So an 8-0 brush would be just barely anything left. I might even have one. Yeah, I've got a super small one here. Here's an 18-0. So that's barely, it's just a couple bristles there on the end. So that's the basics of how to read what these different brush sizes are and what they mean. And a lot of times people want to start off with these types of brushes, and this one's pretty splayed out, and these do get kind of messed up rather quickly. So we're gonna just be using these 2 brushes for this assignment. And this is a Princeton flat shader. This is for acrylic and oils, but I use it for watercolors and stuff like that as well. And I think it's good because it's got a springier bristle. If we look at the bristles here, they're actually kind of springy. They're not moppy like this. So when we put this down, this immediately is going to be a little bit more difficult to control. Starting out, something like this is really good because we'll know exactly where our edges are when we're shading with this. So get a liner. There's one available in the drawing list that I highlight. That's this one here. And then get one of these flat shader brushes. But if you don't find this, just find a brush that has a little bit more springy, square, rectangular top to it, and you can use those too. Not moppy, springy. That's important to know. Now that we've looked at brushes a little bit, since this assignment we're going to be using brushes and pen and ink, I also specified getting a dip pen. And a lot of people may have not used these types of pens before, so I'm going to do a quick demonstration on that. Here's some India ink. Shake it up before you use it. And with these pens, the key is when you dip it into your ink, you don't want to submerge this tip all the way up to here. You just want to submerge it about 3/4, it's about halfway up. I'd put it about up to here. So it's about 3/4 of the whole width of the nib. This thing's called a nib, this thing's called a holder. So go up to around about here. This one's even indented a little bit, and you can see. So you dip it into your ink. And one thing with this, if you hold it straight up, it's not going to work as well. You want to hold it a little bit at an angle when you're working with this. So you might want to move your hand back just a little bit too. And just start off by playing around with making some different marks with this. You're going to notice the ink sits in that little well right there, and there's a little hole on this side that allows it to flow out. And one thing about these pens, which is quite nice compared to many other pens, is you can vary the width of your line by using different pressures. Put more pressure, you get a fatter line. And that's going to be important as we get into things like line weight and stuff like that later on. But the more line variation you have in a drawing, it's a quick way to make it interesting. This ink is almost out. I should be. And you can see I'm going one way. There's this direction. I'm not going back up like this. I can, but that's going to put a weird pressure on that nib. We kind of want to pull open those two tines and allow the ink to just slowly flow out. So play around with some different lines. Look at how the nice difference in line width that you can get, this variation. It's a little bit fatter here, it's a little bit thinner there. This is a really quick, easy cheat way to just get more interesting drawings, because your lines are just going to be more and more varied right off the bat. Play around with that a little bit. Now, there's a couple other different pens you can use for this assignment. If you're still scared to get into your dip pen, we are going to be using this in a later assignment when we start hatching and stuff like that. We can also just use a Sharpie. And as you can see the difference immediately, look at how this line has a lot more variation. It gets skinny here, it gets fatter here. Sharpie, it's going to be pretty much the same size throughout the entirety of your drawing. Felt tip pen, or this isn't a felt tip pen, I guess. It's a little Paper Mate. These are okay. A little bit skinny, but the ink flows well. Here's just a piece of bamboo. This is what Van Gogh used, and it's just a piece of bamboo that's been cut sideways with a little hole in the top. We saw that hole in the top there, and we also see that in all these different ones. And you can just dip this in ink. And use that as well. It's all about finding what is it that you want to use. This actually holds quite a bit of ink. When it runs out, you can get that kind of shading mark with it too, which is kind of nice. There's this glass one that I have as well, which is kind of interesting. It's a glass pen with a little swirly on the end. It doesn't work at all. Some of these are flatter on the end, so you can see if you have that flat end, that also varies the line based on what direction you're going with the pen. And here's another different type of nib. This one's pretty old, but it's got a very, very fine tip on it as well. So all these pens are going to act a little bit differently. It's all about finding out which pen you're the most comfortable with. So all these pens are going to act differently. Here is a refillable fountain pen. And I can show you how these are filled up really quickly. You actually take this thing apart and it's got a little well in it right here. And you dip that in. Twist this little piston. And that fills this reservoir full of ink. This pen is made by a company called Jinhao. And they're not expensive. This was like $6. And I use this pen quite a bit, just because you don't have to carry around ink when you use it, but you can get some of the similar effects. But also with this, you want to keep it rather angled in that same direction when you're using it. When you're using it upright, it still writes, but it's not quite as good. If you drag it, you can get some splatter effects with it. But be careful that you don't, totally destroy the nib on it. But I've used that for some splatter effects in the past as well. But this is a pretty good pen. It holds ink. This is Noodler's black ink that I got there as well. And it works pretty well. But if you only have access to a Sharpie, use a Sharpie or use a felt tip pen, use a stick and dip it in some ink. The main thing is you just want to find the way you're comfortable with making a mark. And Paul Klee said that a line is just a dot that decided to go for a walk. And that's how we're just going to start thinking about these next drawings that we get into. Now let's think about something called the elements of design. And we're going to talk about these in relation to a lot of the different assignments we do throughout the rest of this class as well. And the elements of design are basically like the structure, the skeleton that holds art together. So you can look at a lot of different art pieces and you'll be able to identify these different elements of design. And they are line, value, shape, space, texture, form, and color. And these are the different elements of design. There's 7 of them, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And most of these we know, line is simply a line. Lines don't exist in nature. When we're looking at the world, we don't see a lot of lines. We see a lot of values. So when we look at nature, we see a big green shape up against a big black shape, and they're all colliding. It's very rare that we see a line anywhere in nature, unless it's, some animal pattern or something like that. So lines are human inventions that are a way of transcribing the three-dimensional world and putting it onto a two-dimensional plane. So we understand, a certain vocabulary of lines, that if we put lines together, they can indicate space and shape and these sort of things. Value is simply, we talked about in the last lesson as well, it's simply the lightness or darkness of a color. And all colors have value. Later we'll have an assignment that's actually just called color as value. And so when we're looking at the world in front of us, we'll see that all this stuff is in some sort of color, and all those colors correspond to a certain value, right? A certain lightness or darkness. So that's value. Shape is simply, we have different shapes in the world that we see, and we can understand how those shapes move in space, which is the next one, space. What type of space are we looking at in this rectangle? Is it shallow space, meaning are we looking at a very, very shallow space where a still life might be? Or is it a very, very vast sort of space? We're also thinking about what's the space between objects in our compositions. Texture, we'll do an assignment on that as well when we start drawing tree bark. And that's, texture is texture. Form is the way we can think about going around objects. So objects also have form. They feel like sculptures in space. And part of the duty of drawing, once again, is to make that form be believable as an illusion on a two-dimensional surface. Color, of course, is color. And I don't think we need to get into that too much, but there you go, some color. So colors all have certain values, as we said before as well, and this color corresponds to a value. What's a quick way of seeing the value of a color? Well, you can just take a picture with your phone, switch that picture into black and white, and you'll see the value of that color. This red has a certain darkness on the value scale. Now, when we're translating the three-dimensional world onto the two-dimensional surface, we often use symbols that kind of serve as stand-ins for things that we recognize. Now, in drawing, when we are growing up, when we're little kids, we kind of start off making something like this, right? And this is the idea of a body. This is an idea of legs. These are the ideas of hands. We might even have two eyes, a mouth, hair, ears. We're looking at things as pieces that go together on a larger whole, right? When you see this, you can tell I'm trying to make an eye. When you see this is a sun. This is a tree. And this is our visual vocabulary that we have from growing up. We learn different symbols that signify certain things in our lives. Now, when we're drawing, often when we're trying to do realistic drawings of the world, we want to translate abstract shapes from nature or from the real world, and we want to translate these abstract shapes onto this two-dimensional surface. Now, what does that mean? Let's take a look at this eye here. When we look at this eye, we can see that it's really just a bunch of abstract shapes that have been put together in space that represent an eye. So we have this large black shape, and you can even see this black here just goes into that exact same color as the eye itself. Down in here we have another abstract shape, black, and then this part is a little bit redder. But essentially this is a bunch of abstract shapes coming together to try and create the illusion of the three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface. And when we're looking at different types of objects, we'll often see abstract shapes within these objects as well. When we look at this, we think apple, right? That kind of looks like an apple. But within this apple, we have all these different types of abstract shapes. Look at all these highlights and that sort of snake going around those highlights there, or this dark side. All of these things are a bunch of abstract shapes that are mushed together into what creates an object. Now, for this assignment, the first part, you're going to be looking at that image that we have up. And this is coming from the idea of this book called Drawing on the Right Side of Your Brain by Betty Edwards. And basically, it's the idea that your brain has two different sides, and left brain tends to be more analytical. Our left brain would be associated more with symbols. And the right side of the brain would be more of this arts and abstract ideas, critical thinking, these sort of things would exist on the right side of your brain. So oftentimes, how we merge these two sides is important in drawing and how we create drawings, right? When we're looking at this Picasso drawing here, you're going to be drawing it upside down. And the reason why this is helpful as an exercise is because it forces you to stop looking at these things as hands. Stop looking at this as an eye and this as a nose and all these sorts of things. Just put it upside down right next to your drawing area. And there's also two lines that go through this. This is often called a plumb line. And when you have a vertical line and a horizontal line, it can kind of help situate different angles, right? So when we're looking at a drawing, keep it the same, this is 90 degrees to this. The things are both in alignment, and we can tell this angle in relation to this line a little bit better. So that's why we have these two guiding lines as well. You can use them. You can actually draw them on your paper if you want, or you can just use them as guiding lines. Oftentimes when you see people that are doing figure drawing, they would just have a string and tie a bolt to the bottom of the string and hold that string up, and it would create a straight line so they could look at the figure and see how the figure was in relation to that straight line and how different shapes moved based on that straight line. So this is just, these two straight lines are just reference points. So what you're gonna do now is get a Sharpie or a pen, whichever that you're using, and you're gonna be taking a line for a walk, like Paul Klee said, and just begin at any point that you want. Bottom of the head's probably the best. And on your paper, you're just gonna follow those lines and those shapes. Don't think about it being an ear. Don't think about it being an eye that you're drawing, anything like that. And you're gonna draw this upside down. And hopefully that will force you to stop seeing things as symbols and begin to start seeing them as abstract shapes. So let's get into this one. For this part of the assignment, you're going to be making what's called a blind contour self-portrait. So you're going to be drawing a picture of yourself as a blind contour, and a blind contour drawing is a drawing where you don't look at the paper. You only look at your photo in this case. So take a selfie of yourself. I did my best blue steel in this one here. But when you take your photo, you want to get a 3/4 view. So just tilt your head a little bit to one side so you're not just looking straight at the camera. And this just gives us a little bit more form that we can play with when we're drawing. Then you're just going to set up your phone so you're looking right at it. Pick a point on your photo and you're going to draw nonstop without letting up the tip of your marker or your pen. I'm going to use Sharpie just because it's really thick and it makes, you know, a solid line. I don't have to worry about not looking and then I look at my page at the end and I'm like, oh, my pen ran out of ink or something like that. So I'm going to use the Sharpie for this. You could also use, you know, one of these felt tip pens or something like that. And I'll actually, just to ensure that I really don't cheat, I'm going to cover up my hand as well. So I've got my hand covered up. This can be fun for you to do as well. And then just pick a point on your photo and start drawing. The point of this exercise is to move your pen, move your marker, and move your eye at the same pace. Just pay attention to the direction of all those different shapes. And do this for about 10 minutes. You don't ever need to let up your pen the entire time. Just keep your Sharpie on the ground. On the ground? On the paper. And these are gonna look weird. That's part of the point. You don't want them to look totally normal. If they look too good, I'll know that you're cheating. I'm just moving around all the contours of our face here. I'm lucky because I have a beard, and that's a big, dark shape, which also defines the form of the face. Just going around all these things, and as you're doing this, start thinking about how these shapes collide with one another. All we're doing is looking. There you go. Pretty close, I'd say. Yeah. So you can see I have the idea of all these different shapes. And of course, you're going to be tempted to shade these in, but we're going to use something else. Get a little ketchup container or a little cup of any type and put some water in it. Then you're going to take a drop of your India ink. I'm going to drop it into that water. I'm going to get our brush, our flat brush here. And this is just a simple way to make a gray. Nice. Of course, got some on my phone. But you can see here, this is a simple way to make a gray. And go back to your image and start looking at all those places where it's just a little bit darker. So on my image, it's going to be down here. It's a darker gray down here. On the inside of my eyes, it's a little bit grayer there. And we're going to make this a little bit stronger. Put 2 more drops in. And these are going to look weird, obviously. So just look at your photo and imagine some areas where there's shadow. Now, why do you think I'm having you draw first shadow on something like this? The main reason is because you can't really screw this up. That takes away all the worries of messing up a drawing. I can't help but try to fix it. But yeah, so you got this basic shading. You can start thinking about, okay, this part's darker, this part's lighter, you know, like that. Now that we've done our blind contour, we're gonna move on to a contour line drawing of our face. And we're gonna do it the same way. We're just gonna take our image, we're gonna flip it upside down, and then we're gonna take our line for a walk, just like we did with the Picasso drawing, and just let our line snake around all these contours. Again, this is gonna be a drawing that does not need to come out perfect. The point of the drawing is the exercise itself. It's like going to the gym or playing a violin or anything like that. It's just practice to start looking, observing, and copying nature. So take a picture of yourself, have a 3/4 view, have some sort of light, you know, so you can play with the lighting a little bit. And then put your phone upside down like this and draw from your image. You're going to draw yourself, and while you're drawing yourself, think about how much do I really need to look at the paper and how much do I need to look at the image. It's a really simple thing, but whenever we're drawing, we're looking at something and then we're translating what we looked at onto the paper. We're basically translating spatial relationships between objects and space and different, you know, what are the relationships between different shadow areas and all this sort of stuff. So we're going to flip ourselves upside down and just do a quick, try maybe 15 minutes. This shouldn't take you too long, but try one of these upside down portrait drawings of yourself and try to get rid of this tendency to make an eye look like an eye and a nose, you know, look like a nose, and then you have lips. Try to think of yourself as just taking your line for a walk around all those shapes, and they can be totally abstract. They don't need to make sense. So let's review what we covered today. The first big thing was symbols versus abstract shapes, and how we want to stop using symbols if we want to draw realistically and start looking for abstract shapes within nature and within the things that we're drawing from. We also learned about the elements of design, and those are line, form, value, space, shape, texture, and color. So these are the nuts and bolts of visual art in general, and they're just good things to just keep an eye out when you're looking at any type of art, especially painting and drawing. The most important that we're going to be focusing on are going to be line and value. Those two are going to come up quite a bit as we move forward. We also learned about plumb lines. If we remember what a plumb line is, that's just a reference point, a line that's either vertical or horizontal, and we look at that line and then we can discern where the angles of other things within our drawings are. As we move forward, later on, we're going to be using a grid that's going to help us situate where our drawings are as well. So a plumb line is a predecessor to the future grid that's coming up. So for this assignment this week, there's 3 parts. The first is to do the upside down Picasso drawing. Now, if you can't print it out, you know, work from your computer. It's better to have a larger image of it, of course. The second is the blind contour self-portrait. So take a picture of yourself and do a blind contour drawing of it. And then the third is the upside down self-portrait. So those are the 3 assignments that you've got to finish by next week. And I hope that as you're doing these, you remember that these drawings are not supposed to end up looking beautiful right now. We're doing a lot of drawings, and we're playing with a lot of different mediums so that you can get a basic understanding of these other mediums as you move through the semester and figure out what do you like the most. You know, we're also trying things out because you got that major project that you're working on as well. And, you know, is that going to be a watercolor or a charcoal or a pen and ink or whatever? And so we're playing around with a lot of different mediums. And coming up next week, we're going to be getting into charcoal. So that'll be fun too. So stay tuned for that, and I look forward to seeing your work.